in the chat where you're sharing, and we'll be starting in around 5 minutes, just giving a bit of time to everyone to connect.
Flora, what's your drink for today?
Having a nice coffee, the one with caramel and almonds tone that I mentioned. And yours?
I have a fancy tea for today. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. It's Pu'er tea. It's a Chinese one.
Oh,
Do you know
yeah,
this
yeah.
one? It's
I've
almost
heard
a
of
black
it.
tea. Yeah.
Ah, is it good? I've never tried it.
Yeah, it's really good. And it has ginger and pepper as well. So it's good for, because here in Brazil we are just at the beginning of the day, so it's good for this time of the day. So yeah. And I've discovered that what they call black tea, we call red tea. So we
Oh,
have these variations. I discovered this week.
we need a workshop on teas once, Carol. I've been wanting
Yeah.
to get new drinks. And you, Gab, what are you having as a drink?
I'm empty-handed today. I got nothing.
One.
I hate the mug from the office. It's just terrible.
Okay.
The coffee machine doesn't help, you know.
It's like one investment you should do in a workplace, get a nice coffee.
Yeah, and they downgraded it.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they bought a worse one.
What about you, Andrea?
With tea for now, but I want to show my cup. It's really beautiful. I love how many
Oh, I
bugs
love
are.
it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you very
Nice.
much. What about you, Emilio?
Same situation as Gabriel.
And so, and our guest, Mahi, what are you having today?
I'm so boring, but I love my sparkling water. Oh, you don't even see
Yeah,
it.
it's the best.
There you go.
Oh,
This is actually like my reason to come to the office because they have sparkling water here. So I'm always like, incentivized to come. Yeah, that's my main go-to thing. And my friends make fun of me because they're like, you can't treat yourself with sparkling water. I'm like, but I like it.
I like it too. But you said that in Germany you have many different types of sparkling water. So it's something like you have I don't know, it's a thing. It's not a common water,
Yeah, I
right?
don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like in other cultures as well, but like you kind of grow up with it. And my mom even says she can't drink, non-sparkling water because it tastes like dead feet to her. And I don't know where that comes from, but yeah, it's kind of weird to me not to have sparkling water.
no, makes sense. It's like a sommelier of a sparkling water in that sense, right? Different kinds, different bubble size.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, this is medium. This is like a little bit of bubbles. This is like the extreme bubbles.
Do
That's
you
nice.
also take flavored sparkling water or just sparkling water neutral?
No, just the plain old.
My
Fair enough.
mother-in-law is the same. She just finds normal water grows. I don't know how does she do that, but yeah, she finds normal water grows.
And folks, feel free to join our first poll as we welcome you in the session. And I think we can officially start now. So welcome everyone and welcome to our Behavioral Systems Coffee. So it's the place where we grab a nice drink, as you could see from our brief intro, and have a chilled conversation about behavioral sciences and systems thinking in the face of complex problems and with folks around the world. So I'm Flora. I'm one of our hosts. I'm calling from Brazil, and as a good Brazilian, having a great cup of coffee. And I'm joined today by Carol and a really special guest that will be presenting really soon, and also by Gabriel, Andrea, and Emilio, who are also part of the behavioral systems team. So Carol, with you.
Yeah. So we decided to do a Halloween special on wicked problems, but I think we should like take a step back and talk about what exactly is a wicked problem. I don't know if you all know this concept. Well, the term was first introduced in 1970s by two design theorists. And just to be clear, when they said wicked, they didn't mean evil or bad. They meant tricky, tangled, hard to pin down. So it's the kind of problem that keeps changing as you try to understand it. And the more you look, the more layers you can find. So basically, wicked problems are those really complex social or policy challenges, things like climate change, inequality, or public health that don't have a clear cause or clear solutions or even clear definitions. And the designers described 10 features that make these problems so wicked. First, first one is that you can really define them neatly. There's no single definitive way to describe them. And second, there's no clear point where you can say, oh, where we're done here. So that's no stopping rule. And third, solutions aren't true or false. They are better or worse solutions. You can test them like a lab experiment. And fourth, every attempt counts because once you act, you can fully undo it. So there is no try again button that you can let that can let you do another attempt. So, and another thing is that there's no end to possible solutions. Every team, every perspective could come up with a different approach, and they would all see a different piece of the puzzle. And also, each wicked problem is unique. There is always something about this situation that makes it different from others. And and even more, a wicked problem is often just a symptom of another bigger problem. And how you describe it actually shapes the kind of solutions you even consider. And finally, the people trying to solve these problems, the planners, as the designers call them, can just be wrong and move on. Because in the real world, their actions have consequence for people's lives. So when you talk about wicked problems, you're talking about messy, interconnected situations that demand collaboration and continuous learning. There is no perfect answer for wicked problems. And that really is what makes them so wicked, as you can say.
Great. And just as a bit of housekeeping, the idea today is that we have a really relaxed conversation with Mahi, and who will be introducing really soon. So welcome you all, and it's nice to see Guilherme with his coffee and red wine, really French, and Saud with Arabic coffee, and Kazi from Bangladesh with lemon tea. So it's really nice to see that we can gather a crowd from people all over the world. So the idea here is to provide a space for us to interact and to have this conversation. So we have prepared some questions, but in the middle of the session, we'll definitely open for Q&A. So feel free to add your question in the chat, or to like add there that you do want to open your mic and do a question yourself, because it's a complex theme as it is. So let's make the environment fun and chilled in that sense. So today we're joined by Marie Stege. If I did a good use of my German to introduce herself, but she is an applied behavioral scientist at the International Rescue Committee's Airbell Impact Lab and a PhD candidate in behavioral science at the LSE. and she's dedicated to addressing humanitarian challenges at the nexus of climate and conflict, and brings extensive field experience in Niger, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, Northeast Syria, and Pakistan. So I actually met Mahi earlier this year in 2 occasions. So one, she was at the stage and talking really impressively about behavioral systems. So it was really interesting to see her perspective in such a new theme in our field. I would say like that it's been not new, but it's now in the crest of the wave, let's say, with a lot of attention. And after a couple months after that, I had a chance to connect to her and to learn more about her work and her research. And that was really impressive. And we were like, we definitely have to have you for this conversation and for this theme. So we're really glad to have you here, Mahi. And let's start with a bit of your background. So, how did you get into this field? And tell us about your story and why did you think that's relevant at first place?
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you again and like meet all of the rest. And yeah, very happy to have this very chill conversation. Even though my drink is not as fancy as all of your drinks. Yeah, as you did a little intro, I will just jump into a bit of the background. So I think it started back when I did my bachelor's, which was in the Netherlands, and I studied more like emerging markets. So it's a weird mix of kind of politics, economics, and a little bit of yeah, a development flavor. And I specialized in like environmental problems and also, yeah, gender. So within that program, I went to Latin America, to Ecuador specifically, and did an internship there. And that kind of like opened the door to the humanitarian space because I lived in the Quechua community in Ecuador to do some evaluations of a development program there. And you know, the more you live in that community and you start talking to people, they're like, hey, what are you doing here? Like, why are we not really involved in this program from the first instance? So it just made me really question how specific yeah, programs are actually implemented and why you often come to a place and you're like, how, yeah, how is this evaluation going on and why are we doing the interactive activities mostly after something has been implemented? So I really wanted to understand more why this was happening. And then I came across behavioral science and just decided to start a master's there at the London School of Economics, and still kept this, yeah, kind of environmental or humanitarian aid lens there, and tried to understand what kind of interventions would actually be helpful and how can we involve people more from the get-go and really understand what are the cultural factors that are important, what are some behavioral factors that are important there. And yeah, did my master's there. And then afterwards, yeah, jumped straight into working with the IRC, and I'm in their research and innovation team as a behavioral scientist, and now focusing specifically on all of the environmental yeah, work. So we have work in all of the different countries that you already mentioned, like Somalia, Niger, South Sudan, and we do a lot of yeah, climate resilience work that I can talk about a little bit more. But yeah, I think this is the main start of, you know, coming from more kind of economics business background to questioning what is going on in the field and how we can involve more the communities itself to then behavioral science.
More impressive background. And you have worked so in so many places where challenges are far from simple. You mentioned Somalia, South Sudan, right? And what has been your experience dealing with wicked problems in practice?
Yeah, I think you already did a very good summary of what a wicked problem even is, because I think it's sometimes very difficult to even wrap your head around what is a wicked problem. And yeah, I mean, it's not for nothing a Halloween special and sounds scary. And I think that's the problem most of the time. So, for example, when we start a problem in, let's say, Niger, and it's an agricultural program that we're trying to do, but you need to understand first what is the context. And there's so many different stakeholders that are there. There's so many factors interplaying to even understand what is the problem there. So in the regions where we're working, and there's so many overlapping crises that are, making it very difficult to know where should you even start. So I think in all of the contexts that I worked in, the common theme is this unpredictability, the interdependencies between different stakeholders, between different actors, and everything is also rapidly evolving. So you never really know what will happen soon, because you have things like floods and droughts happening, you have different conflicts happening, and also conflict and climate are often interrelated. It's just a very fast changing environment. So you can imagine when you're trying to start, for example, an agricultural program to really understand what is going on the ground, let's say, then you really need to think, what are we even trying to solve here? And usually in behavioral science, you would say, hey, this is the actor that we should look into and try to help them, let's say, as a farmer, use more fertilizer. But if it's such a, challenging environment, it's really hard to say that and say, this is the actor we need to concentrate on. This is the behavior, because the behavior is so dependent on the context, on all of the different people that are involved with that, in that. And I think when you're at uni, it's so easy to say, oh, this is the target behavior. These are the things that have been tried. There's a lot of background research. Let's try this. Let's do an RCT, done. This is just not how it works in reality. And that's something that you really need to unlearn when you're in this space, because you often come from university, some other backgrounds, and then you're like, this is just all not really applicable. And you really need to, just understand all of these interrelationships and really kind of take a step back and be like, hey, we don't know who we're going to focus on yet. We don't know the target behavior yet. Because everything is so interrelated and constantly changing, we need to kind of zoom out and take a step back of what's happening before we can narrow in and find out what is the one thing that can help here. And most of the time, it doesn't involve one actor, it doesn't involve one intervention, it doesn't just involve, one behavior that we need to change.
No, perfect. And I love the quote Haley added here in the chat, that is, you never solve a wicked problem, you just work on them. And I think it definitely relates to what you're talking, Mahi. And you, like, wicked problems is a definition that exists since the 70s, and you did mention how it opened up the scope of a project, right? When seeing that it's not only about a behavior, and then you cannot only test a single outcome and see if a particular intervention worked, and how it's connected into factors that maybe sometimes are out of our control. But what is the relevance of behavioral sciences or behavioral systems, which is the interconnection of this field, when we talk about wicked problems? How, in your experience, have you seen that being trained as a behavioral science adds to this perspective? Or in terms of methodology, does it have like other components that you look for coming from that perspective?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, first of all, that behavioral science should be more of a lens, right? So I wouldn't say that you can use behavioral science and that's going to solve all of our problems, kind of this gold standard that you can always use. And that will be very arrogant as a field to say behavioral science can solve everything. That's not really what I would like try to advocate for. And it's more about integrating this lens of behavioral science into interdisciplinary approaches. There's so many different ways that people are trying to solve wicked problems. It's not a new concept, as you already mentioned. So it's really about figuring out how can design thinking, how can systems thinking, future thinking, and like behavioral science work together to really make sure that we're taking everything in kind of like one pot and making sure that we can approach it from different angles to make sure that we're considering different perspectives. And I think one thing that I really realized in this work over the past 3 years is let's take an example. We did an agricultural project in Pakistan, and what we tried to do there is increase the access to quality seeds in rural communities. So basically, because of climate change and also in some instances conflict, it's very difficult for people to continue with agriculture. So think about a flood coming and it just washes all of your seeds away. So there was a big problem of seed security there. And you can see how that ties into the wicked problem. Like there's floods, there's conflict, there's just a lot of shifting pieces there. So it was very difficult to think about what is this one intervention that we can do and who should we again target? Is it the farmers? Is it the policymakers? Is it someone who is selling seeds? Like where do you start to help people actually access better seeds to just have more yields in the end? So then when we started the program and when the behavioral science team kind of got onboarded onto the project, it was very, very early stage. So it's not like there was an existing project or an existing program where like, oh, we need to increase the uptake of fertilizer, organic fertilizer, or oh, people just don't know when they should plant, so let's just send an SMS reminder, which I feel like has been done a lot, SMS reminders to farmers, and it's like very easy to measure. But it really sidestepped the interrelationships of different stakeholders and like the deeper underlying problems. So yeah, it was difficult for us to know where's even the starting point. And when I had a meeting with the country program team, so we always have our local experts who we work with, and we're always in constant exchange and collaboration, trying to figure out things together. We were all quite overwhelmed, and we're like, okay, it's probably this problem because that's what we heard about the most. And this is a common thing that happens when it's such a big, very difficult problem that humans tend to just be like, hey, this is what has been talked about the most, so this is the problem definition. But when you haven't talked to the communities, you don't really know what the actual problem is, and we just tend to jump at it. Same things with, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I heard about SMS reminding people to plan at a different time. That's going to be the solution. And we're like, wait. Let's take a step back. We don't know actually what the problem is yet. And we can't just take what a donor maybe tells us is the problem, or what our team thinks is the problem, or what I think is the main problem, because we haven't really integrated the communities yet, right? So we really needed to halt there and make sure that we're opening our minds to, hey, let's not jump at a solution, let's not jump at a problem, let's really have an open mindset, and we can note down our assumptions that we have about a certain system, but let's think about it in a different way. Let's think about it in the way of what would an ideal kind of system look like, and then try to involve communities right at the start, instead of having these kind of mechanism of jumping at a solution, jumping at what is easy to do because we're overwhelmed. And I think even this perspective is really helpful in reminding ourselves that behavioral science is still a lens, and to solve wicked problems we need to get out of this just kind of behavior of jumping at solutions, jumping at what's easy to do. And I think this is why behavioral science as a lens is important. And we'll stop for here for now.
No, but I really like what you're saying, and I think it like opens up a lot of pathways to discussion. So the first thing is that most of like behavioral science projects, if you take the behavioral design approach, it starts with defining the project. And I think what you're saying that the systems perspective can add is that you start with kind of a diagnosis before defining the project, right? And that's quite important. And we always repeat of not jumping to interventions or to solutions without doing a proper diagnose. But when you define a behavioral challenge, which is something so specific, you're kind of already limiting what you're paying attention to. And if you talk about complex systems, you need to assess all possibilities and assess where the investment will be most impactful in a certain system. So, and it also align when we do cross country projects or going in new cultures with communities that have different mental modes and different priorities, how important that is to take participatory approach to assess where a project should be targeting. So I really like that. And the other
And
topic that oh, go ahead,
sorry.
Carol.
No, because I think wicked problems are this, that as you said, there is no starting point. So we can't go jumping into the solution or even to the behavior. We need to know more about this context, about the relations, the correlations, and there's so many things going on, people involved. So it's not a simple diagnosis. So we need to go much further and try to bring things out from this context to help you to then try to say what is the behavior you want to work with, and the solution after that. You mentioned several projects that you worked on, and even an agricultural project with an intersection between behavior, climate, and conflict. Could you share like an example of something that really worked and maybe something that didn't go as you planned?
Yeah, there are a lot of these examples, I think. I will try to just give one for now. Let's take the seed example again from Pakistan, because at least you explained some background on that already. Yeah, and I think that the first learning I've already mentioned a little bit with the whole thing of you're in a team and you're working with people with different backgrounds who are even experts in a certain context, and everyone just jumps at the problem and the solutions. So really making sure that before you even saying what the problem is, you're starting with setting the goals before you dive into what the problem is. So basically, what we found very helpful is to have this first workshop with the teams, with the experts, and saying, hey, how in Pakistan in 2 to 3 years would an ideal seed system for the community look like? So trying to really, go away from this overwhelmed feeling of, oh my God, this is wicked, I don't know what's happening, to being like, hey, in a positive way, like what would be the ideal thing? And this was really helpful from the team, not only to kind of have a North Star and have a common understanding of what our perception of the goal would be, but then the second really important thing is that who should even set out the goal, right? Like, is it the donor, is it the program team? Like, who should even set the goals? And again, we can have our understanding of an ideal scenario of a certain program. In that case, it was, having communities access quality seats on the community level, so make it really available and accessible. And then you need to ask yourself, but what about the communities? How do they understand this? What would their ideal be, right? Because the last thing we want is create something that we think is great and then it's just not gonna work. And just to give another example there, I think one of the key takeaways or the assumptions that the team in Pakistan had was that the main goal, or one of the problems again, was that people don't have access to loans from formal banks, so they just can't afford quality seats. So one of the goals that the team had was, hey, also the availability of formal loans should be really important because we know that's what's happening, or that was the assumption. But by actually talking to the communities and figuring out what are their main goals and what do they see as the main problem linked to that, we figured out actually it's not at all about formal banks. It's really about accessibility of seats from a different angle. I don't want to get into the whole problem of what we discovered, but the main important thing is that an assumption that we had at the start of access to loans from formal banks is the problem. So the affordability of the seats, which could be helped through formal loans, was the issue from our assumption, wasn't actually the case, because people still had access through relatives, through informal systems to actually buy seats. So you see how, yeah, we really need to involve the communities even at like this goal definition and then seeing what the problem is. And another thing that was very helpful is you have to do an iterative process the whole time. So you have an assumption, you can go ahead and like talk to people, but you have to question your assumptions on the get-go and not have one defined problem, and that's just it. So it's a constant iteration because, as we've said at the beginning, a wicked problem might change all the time as well. So we need to also adapt to that. And that was the main learning, like having the goal definition at first, involving the communities right at the start, and like keeping the open mindset open, just to changes as they come along. And something that really didn't work was we tried to. So once we did a lot of qualitative work, we talked to the communities, we tried to kind of map all of these relationships. So who's involved in this agriculture system? So you already can imagine there are like so many different stakeholders, like policymakers, agro dealers who are selling seeds, the farmers themselves, NGOs, and then all of the problems. And we tried to link it together and just create a visual representation, and we tried to show that to the team. And I don't know if you ever seen like one of those causal loop diagrams, but basically it is really overwhelming. It's really like you look and you're like, what am I even looking at? This is not helpful at all. And we've shown it to the team, and they did not understand at all what was going on. It was not helpful at all. And we're like, okay, this is very confusing, and probably they're thinking we're crazy and not helpful. So it's also really about what is the process in the background? Like, what are we trying to digest and achieve? What are the tools that we use as researchers on the back end to make sense of it for our, like in our own ways? And what do we share with different teams? What do we share with our experts? What do we share with policymakers? What do we share with people who are not having this behavioral science lens, and what makes sense? Because it's about the tool and the process in the end that help us understand interrelationships, and like what the problem actually is. But how you communicate that is a different thing. And one last thing to that, now, for example, in another project in Somalia, you can still have the interrelationships and like identify what is going on, like a vicious cycle, for example, but you can just take that out and put it in a more digestible manner, instead of overwhelming people with tools that themselves are not helpful. The output is not helpful, just the processing for myself was helpful, going through that, not the output itself. So it's about the process and not the output itself in the end.
I absolutely loved what you just said, because I'm facing exactly that questioning right now in a project. Like, I have this map, but it's so overwhelming. Like, what should I do with that? I definitely cannot present that in a workshop. No one will understand. So those were great insights. And as you were answering, I kept wondering about this communication bit, because a lot of time when we are engaging a new partner, like usually someone who owns the problem, so let's say the community or a government agency that are not behaviorally trained, we use case studies, interventions to kind of help explain what are we talking about, right? And what a behavioral intervention would look like, especially in regards to its pragmatic advantage, let's say, and how we can shift from educate.
Oh, wait, I don't know if it's me, but I couldn't hear like the end of the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I think
Can
that I think her
Yeah,
yeah,
now it's okay.
I back?
we're back.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. So, but to maybe help to explain how it is like a pragmatic approach. And I was wondering whether in this case the nature of the interventions change, and whether you've had any difficulty in like when thinking of the intervention, having something that you can actually work with and not like a really big and difficult policy that needs to be implemented, and then you see yourself in terms that you cannot do anything.
Yeah, I think if I understood the question correctly, it's this whole process is also about trying to understand where can we actually intervene. So a big part of this diagnosis part is understanding what's going on, seeing how also communities see the problem, how our team sees the problem, and how the goals are kind of overlapping, and how can we actually come to this ideal scenario, or the overlap between what the community wants and other people in this project, and then seeing, okay, we know that there's, for example, a policy issue. If we take the agriculture example again, if there's a lot of low quality seeds getting imported, for example, and in the community there's just a lot of, seeds in the system that are just not adapted to this certain context because they're imported. That's a policy thing, right? Like you need to make sure that there are some taxes, some regulations on the policy level, and it's like safe from that side. But it's still good to know how that's impacting the whole system and what's going on. But that doesn't mean that we would say, hey, we're going to be involved in policymaking now. No, it's just about understanding what other factors do we need to take into consideration when we actually think about an intervention. And I think that's one of the main points, to figure out where in this big system can we actually make an impact. Because, resources are always really tight. We need to figure out how can we most effectively use the resources that we have. And that's not just money, that's also, people, it's time. And it's trying to figure out where's our mandate? Like, where can we actually make a change? And to also see how that intervention then maybe links to other policies, other interventions that are already happening. So again, what we did in Niger, for example, which is also the seed security agricultural program, we tried to understand, first of all, where's the best part, or like the best point for IRC to intervene. What can we do that would be helpful in this case? But we also tried to map what is already going on, what kind of policies are already happening, what are other NGOs, for example, doing, and are they trying to change something like linked to this specific opportunity area or this specific point in the system that we need to take into consideration. So if someone is already trying to, dial something in the system, and we would say, hey, we want to do a certain intervention, and that would work against it, it wouldn't be effective, right? It would be a waste of time and resources. So it's really important to understand who's already trying to do what in that system, because it's also interlinked, right? So really trying to make sure when you think about interventions, not only where's the best point, but also in what direction are people already trying to intervene, and making sure it's not working like in polar opposites, if that makes sense.
And do you
No,
think
yeah.
that this system thinking, it's something that we could apply in every context? I saw the questions, and I saw that Erica from Colombia just sent one asking if you think that system approach work in all contexts.
I mean, I think my main learning or takeaway from these 3 years is always well, I don't want to say it depends because that's always the annoying answer, but I think the most important thing, it's what I'm trying to propose here, or what IRC is trying to propose, is more of a mindset shift. So as I was saying before, it's not about using a certain tool or about you have to do this, mapping with the causal loop diagram. It doesn't really matter. What is important is that you don't jump into saying this is the target behavior and this is the main problem, and we already know that. You need to think like, okay, but what do we actually know? Let's take a step back and think, how can we make sure that we're not missing something? So I think it's more about having this hypothesis mindset when we're starting out at a project, and really questioning, where does this definition of the target behavior, if it's already defined, come from? Like, do we actually know that this is the problem, or the thing that we need to focus on? And is it actually really the actor that we need to focus on? I don't know, like in healthcare or whatever you want to use as an example, like, is it really the parent that needs to be focused on, or is it maybe a healthcare worker who can help, let's say, increase vaccination rates? Like, who do we actually need to focus on? So really making sure that you're having more of these mindset shifts of taking a step back, seeing what is the bigger picture there. I think this general mindset is very applicable of open your mind to you might be wrong, let's talk to the communities, make sure you involve them from the start, and really questioning where the definition of the target behavior comes from, and really making sure that whatever you end up defining as the problem, and then therefore defining intervention, making sure that you look at the different spillovers in the system. If you say, this is the target behavior, now we're going to do this in this intervention, how would that link to other things that are going on in the system? And making sure that you look at those interrelationships and look at the different stakeholders that are involved, because it's not as easy as A, then we do this and it leads to B. It's just not happening in most of the cases.
I totally agree. It's much more than using a specific tool or a specific framework. It's a mindset shift. It's how we go to a problem or how we see a project from the start, right?
100%. And I mean, hopefully soon we will also, publish our scope work that talks about these mindset shifts in a bit more detail. And, we try to give people at least an idea of what kinds of tools you can use to achieve those mindset shifts. But it's just an idea. It might be completely different to other contexts. So I think it's always about what is possible in your case, and how can you interpret these mindset shifts and make it work in your context. So I think it's really important to just question yourself and trying to think, what is the main aim here? How can I keep these mindset shifts, in mind, and rethink it? And then what is the right tool for it in my specific case?
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I think frameworks and methodologies are always a tool also to help us understand and help us start thinking in a different way, right? But once you have an expertise in a field, then you also develop new ways to apply that knowledge that, well, context requires adaptation all the time. And Mahi, you did mention a bit about the scope approach. Can you give us a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, so basically it's trying to summarize everything that we talked about here. So the main part here is trying to think through how can we apply behavioral insights in more complex and fastly shifting environments. And it's talking about these mindset shifts that we already talked about a little today. And it's really trying to understand, what do we need to do before we even come to a behavioral science project, or like the traditional behavioral science project. So all about how do we actually define the goals of a project? How do we do that? How do we involve the communities to also define the goal first together? How do we make sure that we are understanding all of these interrelationships between different actors, and really begin to understand these interrelationships, and what are different tools for that, or different ways of doing that, and having this mindset of, hey, if there's actor A and actor B, how are they interrelated, and how is that maybe affecting certain decision making? So really making sure this interrelationship is also taken into consideration. And it's also proposing an interdisciplinary way of looking at wicked problems, because again, it would be very arrogant to say that behavioral science is the solution for everything, but making sure that before you start a project to say, okay, is this inherently a behavioral science problem, or is it maybe more of a structural problem, and we can, have a behavioral lens and help with that, but it's not inherently like a traditional behavioral science project, but also knowing, when to step back. So it's really looking at everything before a target behavior and trying to make sure, to look at those problems in a different way, and trying to have a practitioner, guideline for how to do that. And guide people through this process that we've been using, and trying to see how it could be helpful for other people to understand this mindset shift, and just be a little North Star in these wicked problems. I could probably talk about this a lot more in a lot more detail as well, but I'm not sure how helpful this would be without actually seeing the approach. But it's gonna be published very soon, with like the background of why it's important, why we think this is helpful, and then a more extended guide really talking you through the different steps that I mentioned with the goal setting, really talking to people in the communities who are affected early on, and trying to understand those interrelationships, and visualizing that in different ways.
No, it looks fascinating. It definitely answers a lot of limitations that are being discussed in the field. And yeah, please share with us once it is published, and we can also share in the mailing list with those that have been here today. Mahi, I think I'll do one last question from the Q&A, and then we can start with our final question. But you did mention like structural and behavioral problems, and I think one factor that always stood in the middle of that, from my perspective, was culture, right? So it's like a macro thing, but that also incorporates a lot of mental models and social norms and aspects like that. And Xiaotong Liu from China asked whether behavioral systems could help in terms of understanding culture and social norms. So, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's like a core thing that we're trying to do as well, because, well, let me take an example. Like in Somalia, for example, we're trying to understand right now how pastoralists, so people who are having mainly camels and goats, and they're herders, that's their livelihood. And how are they kind of making the decision of maybe settling down or migrating, or maybe starting a tea shop? So what are different strategies or different decisions that they're making as pastoralists? But in the context, there's a lot of different variables, like there's constraints like climate change, you have droughts happening, you have some, conflict that's restricting some decisions that you can make. And I think through this process, you're really understanding, why are people forced to make certain decisions, right? And that also, helped us understand that there's a lot of attachment to animals. There's a lot of attachment to this way of life as a pastoralist. So it's very difficult to just say, oh, why is this happening? That has nothing to do with, social norms or like culture norms. No, it has. Like in the research we've seen that of course drought is a big factor there, but another big factor is really this attachment to animals and like attachment to the pastoral lifestyle. That's really a big an important factor. And that's why you really need to talk to communities and like early on and make sure you're understanding the environment in which people are making decisions and also the kind of options that they're seeing from their point of view. So yeah, you can apply it, and that's one of the core things.
It's really interesting. And we have like two other questions for the audience. One comes from Lucas. He's joining us from Malaysia. And he mentioned that when working with communities, it can be hard to get to the root of a problem, especially when people are reluctant to acknowledge what's actually going on. So, do you have any technique or approach that help you cut through the noise and identify what's really at the core of a wicked problem? And the second question is from Pamela, and she's asking about ethics. So, how do you apply ethical principles of even the idea of no harm when working in such complex and sensitive contexts?
Very good questions. So, getting through the core of a wicked problem, it's another wicked problem in itself. And I don't think there's like a gold standard or like, again, one specific tool that's gonna get you there. But it really depends on who you're talking to. And I think one general thing that's important, in whatever context, is trying to make sure you talk to different people with different perspectives, but mainly try to understand how is the lived reality of the people that you're, involving in intervention? Because you need to see the things from the perspective of the community to make sure that you actually know what's going on for them. Like, what is their life like? What are they facing? And the best way to do that is really try to talk to people and understanding things from their perspective to make sure you're cutting or you're intervening at the right point, and then zooming out again and seeing, okay, now we've talked to policymakers and other people, what is really happening here. So this zooming in and out is a very difficult practice, but I think that's how you kind of cut through the noise, or I think that's how you phrased it, to really see what is the lived experience and how does that fit into this bigger problem or system. And also trying to play with different strategies of how you ask questions. Always asking why, like digging deeper, making sure you're asking things in different ways and different time frames to make sure you really understand what is the core of what they're saying. So asking questions multiple times in different ways and making sure that you also think about who should do the interview to really cut through it and people trust the interviewer. And yeah, what are the culture norms there, or like the right things to ethically do research and build this trusting environment. That's another thing on more of the interview basis, cutting through the noise. So just from these two perspectives, that's the main tips I would give. And then the second question was about
Ethics.
ethically.
Yeah.
But is it ethics about the interventions or the research itself?
The research, how to apply like do no harm principles in sensitive contexts that are usually related to wicked problems.
Yeah, I mean, this is at the core of everything that we're trying to do, right? I mean, you need to talk to communities to really make sure whatever intervention you're doing will have no harm. And of course, there's different levels of ethics of how do you ethically talk to people and how do you design the research itself to talk to communities. But when it comes to, even defining and designing something that's linked to do no harm, that's a different layer of, you need to involve the communities to know what spillover effects it will have. So this whole approach of needing to zoom in and out and what's happening is essentially a do no harm principle, because we need to make sure that we understand what the intervention will lead to, what the spillovers will be, so you don't do anything that, from a very top-down level you think is the right thing to do, but it's just ethically completely wrong and does harm in the end. That's why we need to really understand why things are happening and iterate all the time. And if you have an idea of an intervention, talk to the communities, test it in a small way, see what the spillovers might be, because only then you can really understand what is happening and make sure that it's actually helpful, actually linked to what the preference of the community is, and not this top down, we know what's right, and this is how it's going to be, because it's also very hard to anticipate certain harms that you maybe haven't even thought about. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, definitely does. And I think the Buzara case on gender-based violence really highlights that finding from like the value of mapping a system was related to that. Mahi, really to end, so brief answers on those ones, but Isabel just asked a really interesting question. So could you share about the different types of evaluation methods that you use when solutions like cannot be evaluated by typical RCT methods? So how do you evaluate that? And my final question is that we've asked you a lot of answers today, but what is one big question that you have in your mind related to the field and what we've discussed?
Yeah, I think the evaluation part is a really important question, and it's linked to my answer to the question of what am I still thinking about. So I'll answer that first. Like, how can we make sure that we kind of still use RCTs when they're helpful, but in most of the contexts where I work, RCTs are sometimes, just ethically not helpful. But we still do some, lab in the field evaluations. We did one in Northeast Syria, where we already had a pilot going on, and we tried to, tweak things a little bit. So ethically, that was good to do, and you got some quantitative good data out of that. But in a lot of cases, that's difficult to do. So it's more about talking to communities after the evaluation, after the intervention, and think through how we can improve that. Or, like I said, once you have an initial idea, making sure that you do the prototyping together with the communities to, on the get-go, figure out what might be happening and what might be effective and how do you need to tweak it. So it's really about the iteration and the involvement of the communities. And it's not, as clean and causal as an RCT, but you need to really, weigh up ethical kind of like dilemmas and this kind of need for like quantitative causal data that a lot of people still have in their mind as the gold standard. So yeah, a lot of qualitative evaluations, and looking at other data that we already have at the end to like compare how it was at the end versus at the start, which is causally not perfect, but it's all we can do.
Oh,
So
this
yeah,
was
last question, sorry, was just about, how you can improve that and how we can help this mindset shift spread more to other people to make sure, we do have the behavioral science lens instead of this A leads to B, that's why we have to have this intervention, kind of shift away from that. And how do we best do that in a still a rigorous way and can still evaluate and show that it's effective? That's the main question I still have.
No, it's a great question, and I think we should try to answer all together here. It's something that we are trying to do. And this was such a great conversation. We are come to the end of our session. Thank you all for spending this time with us. And of course, thank you, Marie. We'd love to keep in touch, so you can find us and follow the BESI page and Behavior Systems page on LinkedIn. That's where we post news, materials, and future events. We will also drop a few quick questions here on Zoom, and later you get an email with a short feedback form as well. And it really means a lot to us to hear what you think. Your input help us shape the next sessions and make them even better. So thanks again for being part of this conversation, and see you at the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.